To many, the Soviet Union seems like a magical land where the party and the government provided citizens with free housing, healthcare, and education. This myth of the socialist state's generous care still lives on in the minds of many people. However, behind the attractive facade of so-called free benefits, there was an unseemly reality that those nostalgic for the USSR curiously remain silent about. In reality, Soviet citizens paid an exorbitant price for these benefits, and in fact, they gave up more money than citizens of capitalist countries. Yes, you heard that right. Housing, healthcare, and education cost people in the Soviet Union several times more than they did for residents of the decadent West. Precisely cost, because enormous sums were taken from the pockets of Soviet workers, peasants, and intellectuals for these supposedly free benefits. That can't be true! Someone who received an apartment in the USSR might exclaim. I didn't pay a single kopeck for my one-bedroom place. Oh, but you did pay. And how? You paid with your hard-earned money without even realizing it. But how exactly did this happen? The scheme was very simple. Everyone paid, regardless of their work experience, age, gender, or whether they actually received housing or not. Do you want to know how the Soviet Union pulled this off, all while hiding behind the illusion of caring for its people? Let me tell you what the real price of this so-called freebie was. But first, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notifications about new videos. Don't forget to like and leave comments. By doing so, you help promote this video. And if you'd like to support the creator, check out Patreon and buy me a coffee. All the links are in the description and the first comment. To understand just how free the benefits in the Soviet Union really were, you need to compare the economic situation of Soviet citizens with that of their counterparts in capitalist countries like the United States. For example, in 1978, the average salary of an industrial worker in the United States was about $880 per month, while in the USSR, the average worker's salary was roughly 180 rubles. If we take the official exchange rate, where $1 equals 67 kopecks, this gives us approximately dollars as the monthly salary of a Soviet worker. However, the real exchange rate on the black market was significantly higher, which made Soviet salaries even more negligible compared to American ones. A worker in the US could afford much more than his Soviet counterpart. A lathe operator at a Ford plant earned 3 to 4 times more than a lathe operator at the Gorky automobile plant. At the beginning of the 80s, this gap actually increased to more than 500%. Moreover, many goods in the US were cheaper, with incomparably better quality. For example, back in the year 1978, the average retail cost of a brand new car in the United States was roughly $4,300, which was considered quite affordable and well within reach for the typical American worker at that time. In the USSR, however, buying a car was an almost impossible dream for most citizens, since the average prices for cars were 3 times higher than in the US, while salaries were 4 times lower. Furthermore, one had to wait patiently for many years in line to buy a car.
Queue number 8955. Oh dear. What am I supposed to do now?
A pound of coffee in the US cost about $2, which is just over 1 ruble, while in the USSR, the price of a kilogram of coffee in stores, if it was even available, reached up to 45 rubles per kilogram, that is, $30. Butter, cheese, and eggs in the USSR were twice as expensive as in the US. Only the prices of Soviet fish could compete with those abroad, and even then, not all of them. Bread was cheaper, and that's not surprising. Bread was a strategic product in Soviet propaganda. They could even choose to sell it well below the actual production cost just to maintain what they referred to as social stability. And now, let us examine the most important and revealing figures, which will clearly and undeniably show exactly how the Soviet Party and their government systematically fleeced their own citizens. For convenience, all figures will be given in rubles, since that was the currency of the USSR. So, here is a comparison of the minimum subsistence level and workers' salaries in the US and the USSR in 1978, in rubles per person. From this table, we can see that the minimum subsistence level in the USSR was 85 rubles, while the average salary was 180. In other words, almost half of a salary was taken up by the most basic minimal expenses. In the US, however, the minimum subsistence level was 134 rubles, which was only a quarter of the average worker's salary of 586 rubles per month. What do these numbers mean? In the US, the minimum subsistence level allowed not only to cover basic needs, but also to save money, giving American workers much greater financial freedom. And this was despite the fact that workers in the US were far from being the highest paid group of Americans. At the same time, Soviet workers were forced to economize on necessities, spending their modest earnings on basic needs. And yet the working class was considered the elite of the Soviet system. In other sectors of the national economy, salaries were 30 to 50% lower, while the subsistence minimum remained the same. This shows that a significant portion of the population in the Soviet Union faced financial difficulties, living on the edge or below the poverty line.
My name is Anatoly Yefremovich. My last name is Novoseltsev. I live only on my salary, that is from paycheck to paycheck.
Is it even necessary to explain now that free housing, healthcare, and education in the USSR were not really free? After all these social benefits and services were funded and paid for, with the very hard-earned wages and money, that Soviet citizens never actually had the chance to receive directly in their own hands.
For me to receive it?
Why?
To fix my trousers.
You used your last paycheck for pants. The Soviet party and government took this money through low wages and high prices for goods, including basic necessities. This money was used to fund numerous government programs, including the construction of so-called free apartments, the maintenance of so-called free healthcare and education, as well as the upkeep of the massive state bureaucracy, the military-industrial complex, and the army. And while in the USA a citizen paid for necessary benefits out of their own pocket, they also received an adequate salary that allowed them to manage their own finances. In the USSR, however, citizens paid compulsorily by not receiving a significant portion of the money they could have spent at their own discretion and much more efficiently. That's why a person who finally received a long-awaited one-room apartment in the USSR supposedly for free, supposedly without spending a single kopeck, in reality paid for it many times over. And not only did they pay for it, but they also significantly overpaid. The Soviet system sought to create the appearance of equality and care for its citizens, but in reality, this equality meant leveling down into poverty and deprivation. The average Soviet citizen worked more for less compensation than his American counterpart. This gap in living standards was carefully concealed behind a veil of propaganda and ideological slogans. Why this happened is no secret. The reasons lie in the very essence of the USSR's economic system, where the state controlled all aspects of the economy, from production to the distribution of goods. This led to inefficiency, corruption, and shortages. Unlike a market economy where competition drives improvements in the quality of goods and services, the Soviet planned economy could not even provide citizens with basic necessities. As a result, Soviet citizens paid a huge price for the supposed free benefits, housing, healthcare, and education. Their labor, low wages, and limited opportunities were the resources the state used to maintain its power and control over the population. Thus, the myth of free benefits in the USSR collapses under the weight of facts and figures. The real cost of these free benefits was much higher than in countries with a market economy, and it was paid for through the labor and hardships of Soviet citizens.